Caleb Williams and the Bears offense has taken off, but will it last? We digest week 5 of the fantasy football season on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk, and when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. I'm not doing this. I'm writing about NFL fantasy and betting for sportingnews.com.
Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. Terms and conditions apply. We are through 5 weeks of the fantasy season. The season is absolutely flying by, but we're going to go through, as we always do on Monday, the best, worst, and most surprising fantasy performances of the week. To start right off the top, the best, we'll start with the good news here, is the Bears offense came alive this week against the Panthers. Caleb Williams had a great game, 304 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns. Yeah, even got 34 rushing yards on the ground. DJ Moore went off for 105 yards and 2 touchdowns. DeAndre Swift, a second great game in a row. A second great fantasy game in a row, I should say. 21 carries, 73 yards. So not great efficiency. Got into the end zone, though, as a runner, and then put up another 47 receiving yards there as well. Like, all around, this offense looked so much better. Now, was it just because it was the Panthers, or do you feel like they're finally starting to find their groove and it just took time with a rookie quarterback?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, the Panthers matchup is really good, but so is the matchup this week in London against the Jaguars. I mean, that's a very good matchup. And you look at the Bears, I think, as I mentioned, they've kind of found their guys, right? Let's not force Keenan Allen to this mix. Let's not force deep balls to Rome Odunze if they're not there. They're guys right now, when they succeed, are as a progression. DeAndre Swift out of the backfield, he made a big catch as well that padded his totals. Cole Kmet didn't do a lot, but he ended up with almost 60 receiving yards in the game, so he made a few big plays. And then DJ Moore went off. We knew that was coming. I called it here to say, that it was going to be a revenge game, and he was going to just show up the Panthers, and he did. And he plays with a chip on his shoulder, and that's what you had. But it should continue this week against the Jaguars secondary. He was awful. They let big plays happen galore against the Colts with Alec Pierce making big plays. So you can expect another big game potentially from Williams and Moore hooking up. Swift is involved. And Kmet, what's happening here is, look, Rome Odunze is going to flash in some games, but he's going to disappear. Keenan Allen's old and not helpful all that much. So these are the 3 guys. I mean, you don't really need to throw to Keenan Allen, right, when Kmet and Swift are there in the short area. So don't force it to them, right? Get it to these 3 guys. It also helps us in fantasy, right? Okay, Roschon Johnson scored, but for the most part, we know these items, these 4 guys, Williams, Swift, Kmet, and Moore, were their fantasy assets. It makes it a lot easier for us to go forward, knowing who to trust on the Bears and who not to. So, again, I think they figured it out a little bit with Shane Waldron. By the way, Thomas Brown was also the Panthers' offensive coordinator, so a little bit of revenge for that as well, knowing the defense that he had with the Giro Evero. So a lot of factors came into play, but I think a lot of those can keep going against the Jaguars defense.
Yeah, and another team that the Panthers will face next week, it's the Falcons, who the Falcons finally found their offense on Thursday night. So, like, I think this Falcons team maybe found their groove as well with Kirk Cousins. I mean, Kirk Cousins' game is insane, right? 509 yards, 4 touchdowns. It's against the Buccaneers, so I think this is a defense that we're going to be targeting moving forward. The Buccaneers have been pretty unstable all year long, but Drake London finally has his big coming out with 12 receptions, 154 yards, and a touchdown. Darnell Mooney is just a must play. I think every week he's been highly involved in this offense. 9 receptions, 105 yards, 2 touchdowns for him. And then Kyle Pitts finally shows up as well. He gets his 8 targets, 7 receptions, 88 yards. It's like everyone was getting what they should be getting in this offense. Now, Cousins isn't going to be passing for 500 yards every week. So not all of these guys can go off, but it was great to see them all click. Now, Bijan Robinson, though, he could be in the disappointing segment. We're not going to talk about him today, but he's not putting up any fantasy points.
Well, what's happened is Zach Robinson is much like the offensive guy that Kirk Cousins had in Minnesota. Kevin O'Connell came from Sean McVay. He wants to throw the ball. He probably loved this game plan where they said, just keep throwing with Kirk Cousins all game long. You had a little bit of Bijan work into the passing game, but they wasted plays when they were running Tyler Algier up the middle. I said, why are they wasting a down running this guy up the middle when you have all these weapons and you're throwing downfield at will against this team? So that's annoying, right? That they just want to insist pounding Tyler Algier to kind of keep the defense honest, right, on early downs and stuff. Just give it to Bijan Robinson. He was out in a lot of key situations near the goal line. So I don't know, maybe Bijan has got some issues, and we'll talk about another running back that was drafted high that might have some issues, and maybe that's why they don't give him the ball as much. But when I look at London, Mooney, Pitts, we thought Mooney could be kind of the three or the third amigo in this group, like throwing a lot. I mean, Pitts had disappeared. Mooney's been consistent. Now London's exploding. So I think Kirk Cousins has his guys. These are the three guys, much like Williams with Swift, Komet, and Moore. This is the same thing that's happening here. You like the three-weapon system because you can sustain all those weapons in fantasy. So, yeah, it should be a big game ahead. Maybe this is a get-well game for Bijan, too, as a receiver. Maybe channeling DeAndre Swift against the Panthers. Maybe that'll help. You need them also playing a positive game script. Enough. I get Kirk Cousins loves these late fourth-quarter comebacks, but if they can play from ahead, that could also help Bijan.
Yeah, I know. They need to be playing from ahead sometimes. Now, Joe Burrow goes off against the Ravens. Another guy you were right about this week. 5 touchdowns. Jamar Chase, nearly 200 yards, 199, 2 touchdowns. T. Higgins, 2 touchdowns as well, 83 yards. So they were all fantastic. And coming up, their schedule, the Giants, the Browns, who are not a good defense this year, the Eagles, the Raiders. So Joe Burrow and this offense, like Burrow clearly needed T. Higgins back, right?
Yeah.
And now T. Higgins needs to stay healthy because he's had issues doing that throughout his career. But if he can stay healthy, Burrow is going to be a really nice fantasy option moving forward. And I also think Jamar Chase is better when Higgins is out there. So
it's very weird. Yeah. It's like they need Higgins to like, oh yeah, this is how we operate our offense, right? Like when he's out, like everything falls apart. It's very strange. I think maybe they just don't have someone who can command the ball like him. I know they have Andre Acevas and these other dudes, but they're not as dangerous as T. Higgins, right? And as versatile and big playability as well as red zone. So maybe they're just off, right? Not having that guy that can deflect the coverage off Jamar Chase. So yeah, as long as these guys are locked and loaded, another development is the Bengals defense stinks. I mean,
so
Joe Burrow said, I have to be perfect to win the game. Well, he threw an interception late that cost them the game because Ravens don't come back in the game and win in overtime without that interception. So he had to be perfect. That means he knew coming into the game, I got to pour it on. I got to be precise, and got to hand it to him. He was, except for that last pick. But for fantasy purposes, this is really good for Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. We'll see about the Zach Moss injury, but they're going to score too, right? If it trickles down, that they're going to get these guys involved in the red zone when healthy as well, Moss and Brown. So this offense is going to have to keep scoring a ton of points, even in these games. Like the Giants could light them up this week and cause them to keep throwing. So it's a good development if you have Joe Burrow that the Bengals defense is not good. And the Bengals may not be good. So.
Malik Neighbors next week. I hope he's back. I hope he's back so bad. Now, Garrett Wilson and Brandon Ayuk, they both have their first good game of the season, and it was really good games for them. Garrett Wilson, 13 receptions, 101 yards, and a touchdown. Now, it took him 22 targets to get that 13 receptions for 101 yards. So brutal efficiency for him, but he had a big day. Brandon Ayuk looked really good. He looked like his old self, 12 targets, 8 receptions, 147 yards, got it done after the catch as well. Like I'm more optimistic about Brandon Ayuk moving forward. I thought he looked really good. Garrett Wilson, now, would you trade him off this big game, knowing the next 3 weeks he gets the Bills, Steelers, Patriots? Like, I just 22 targets to get to that. I don't feel great. Rodgers is using Alan Lazard a ton in the red zone, end zone targets. So I probably am trying to trade Garrett Wilson off that big game.
Yeah, you make a really good point. And I think if the Jets can run the ball, they want to run the ball. And next week, the Bills, that's how you beat them. So they need to get, hopefully, Breece Hall going and Braylon Allen in that game. You have to run and throw to your backs to beat the Bills, and you don't test their corners as much. So we'll see, but that volume is encouraging, that he was forcing the chemistry, right, between him and Garrett Wilson. We're going to make this work, even if it takes me 30 throws to you to make it work, right? So I don't know. There's not a lot here still. I mean, he's still getting a lot of targets. I mean, you have Lazard and Mike Williams kind of been in and out of the idea of throwing to him. You have maybe Tyler Conklin is ahead of him too, right? Conklin and Lazard seem to be their best options when not throwing to Garrett Wilson. So we'll see how it develops. But yeah, you definitely, when a player's struggling, you want to throw him at someone when he's had his best week. And I think Garrett Wilson's talented. He's going to have a lot of good games because he's just good and he's got Rodgers. But there's also going to be a lot of disappointing games based on the matchups that Michelle just outlined.
Yeah, absolutely. Now we're going to get into the most disappointing performances of the week. We said it when you finally start to have belief in these type of quarterbacks like Sam Darnold, they're going to fall flat on their face, and that's exactly what Sam Darnold did as soon as people trusted him in their fantasy lineups. We'll discuss that performance and the others that were highly disappointing in week 5 right after a quick break.
This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for a small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role, just like you want to do with your fantasy team or NFL teams want to find the right mix of players. So that's how you can do it with LinkedIn Jobs. You have to check it out now. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just your typical job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role in a new organization. In a given month, more than 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional only on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is constantly also finding ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even quicker. 2.5 small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Make sure you're one of them. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply.
This episode is also sponsored by BetterHelp. As an adult, do you make time to learn new things as often as you like, or was that lost in childhood? Kids are always learning and growing, but as adults, sometimes we lose that curiosity. Therapy can help you reconnect with your sense of wonder because your back to school era can come at any age. I know I would not be doing this podcast. I would not be working for NFL Network. I would not be writing for PFF if it weren't for going to online therapy a handful of years back, because I would have never had the confidence to, start my own podcast, to start writing. I never even knew I could write, right? I didn't have that sense of wonder like I had as a kid, as an adult, until I did online therapy, which helped me grow my confidence and just really made me the best person I could be, which allowed me to find these things that I love and really dive into it. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you don't have to stress because you can switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Just visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Sam Darnold, just every week, blowing up defenses, right? And then finally, fantasy managers are like, you know what? I'm going to start playing him. Like, okay. But he gets the Jets' tough defense, so I'll give him that. But 0 touchdowns, 1 interception, only 179 passing yards. Just absolutely brutal. Are you saying just throwing this away because it was against the Jets, in London too? So the travel, or is this Sam Darnold?
Yeah, I think you just have to be careful with quarterbacks such as Sam Darnold and Andy Dalton and Joe Flacco, right? If they have a good matchup, they're going to be okay, right? Just like because they're average or slightly above average quarterbacks at this point. But if they get into a tough matchup, they're not going to grind through it. I mean, even when you look at Aaron Rodgers, it was a tough matchup, but he made the volume happen and ended up with 2 touchdowns in the end, right? So, like, it's going to be very hard for Sam Darnold, especially without his legs, to manufacture that type of fantasy production unless he's doing it all and Justin Jefferson is going off. They held Justin Jefferson in check, and it was just hard to put up points. And then you can't help that the Vikings defense seems to be their best offense in a lot of games where they're scoring, and there's not a lot. And then they had CJ Ham get a rushing touchdown. So that was bad. So again, yeah, I would only look at Sam Darnold in deeper leagues in good matchups. Super flex, he's fine. Like, you need him sometimes, but I would have a third option as well to look at a different quarterback, play the matchups with that second quarterback in the super flex, I would do that for sure. But yeah, you just have to beware. These guys can come down to earth at any point. That's why they're journeyman backups that are bridge quarterbacks, right? And they're not those frontline starters.
Now he does have a bye in week 6, so you're not going to have to make this decision on him. But 4 great matchups coming out of the bye for him: the Lions, Rams, Colts, and Jaguars. So he could still be a very good fantasy option in those 4 games. Now, Josh Allen, back-to-back bad fantasy days for him. I mean, it's been 3 bad fantasy weeks out of the 5. The other 2 were fantastic. Dalton Kincaid is not coming through either. 2 receptions, 34 yards. And that's without Khalil Shakir. So, he should have been the focal point of this offense. Now, clearly Josh Allen was missing Shakir in this matchup. Keon Coleman had the one big play, but he's just not it either. Obviously, you're never going to bench Josh Allen anytime soon. They get Washington and Tampa Bay the next 2 weeks, but are you worried at all about his playmakers not being able to give him enough? And James Cook just playing so great, honestly.
Yeah, before those matchups, unfortunately, they have to play the Jets too. So there's that on Monday night. So they've got some good ones coming up. But yeah, you're probably not feeling the greatest if you are relying on Josh Allen. You see the Jets on the schedule right after that Darnold performance, but he's Josh Allen. He can run his way through that matchup a little bit to put up numbers. That's what you need. You need him to run to put up numbers when the passing game is not coming. I think the Texans did a good job of containing him in both ways in that game. So again, look at the defenses, the Texans and Ravens on the road. Yeah, he struggled. But when he got the Jaguars, great. He lit it up. But everyone lights up the Jaguars at this point. So I don't know. Maybe it's just up and down. Maybe we underestimated these receivers not being the same. And you didn't have Khalil Shakir in this game. And Shakir is a big part of what they want to do in the middle of the field. So, oh boy, I think you still have to keep playing him. But again, we expected there could be some rough patches here, but we thought he could run his way out of it. So that's the key. Run to break your slump a little bit, kind of like a baseball player that's trying to get on base. Run a little bit, get out of your slump, throw downfield, and get some numbers. So again, I would play Allen because you drafted him high against the Jets, but let's hope, again, he can rush for 60 and score, and then you're in business again with him.
Maybe the Bills could be the team to go trade for Devonta Adams. Yeah. That would be
could be.
Now, Breece Hall, second straight terrible week for him as well. 5.2 fantasy points, 9 carries, 23 yards, 3 receptions, 14 yards. And it's like he's still playing a ton of snaps. It's not that Braylon Allen's stealing a bunch of work from him. He's playing 74% of the snaps. But this Jets offense just, I don't know. I know they came through with the passing game at the end of, but still, this run offense is not looking great.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say, though, now looking back at the Broncos, this matchup was tougher than we thought, right, for their defense, or for their offense, I should say. And then you look at this matchup, we know it was tough. The Vikings were coming in. But if Breece Hall can't go in against the Bills, keep in mind this team is just giving up big-time receiving yards to backs, right? We saw Dare Ogunbowale start essentially to help the Texans because of that aspect. And Justice Hill went off the week before, just throwing in the middle of the field. These guys cannot do anything in the middle of the field without Matt Milano. They can't cover. They can't stop the run. If Breece Hall and Braylon Allen don't get going this week, or the Jets don't make them a focal part of the game plan, they are ridiculous, and Nate Hackett should be gone. This is a matchup where it's a get-well game. It looks like, oh, it's tough. It's the Bills. If Hall and Allen don't get it done this week, I am really generally concerned that we might need Hackett to be let go before it's going to get better for this offense.
Hackett is not good at all.
Not hacking it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, against the Bills, he should be good. I will start to get worried if it's a third straight terrible game. Now, Marvin Harrison Jr., 2 receptions, 36 yards on 7 targets. Again, I know we have to count that one big quarter, but it's been one big quarter. And that is really it for him. It was 3, that one huge week 2 game. Now, weeks 3 and 4 were fine because he came down with a touchdown. I think that's kind of what we're going to need moving forward, is that touchdown to be happy with him, because the other guys are just too involved. And Michael Wilson is getting 6 to 9 targets a game. And Trey McBride's back now, and he got 9 targets. And, they're just kind of spreading the ball around. Kyler Murray is. maybe Marvin Harrison's more of a low end wide receiver 2 now instead of keep putting him in as a top 10 wide receiver each week.
Yeah, I mean, he is a rookie. Let's keep that in mind. He is a
Yep.
very talented rookie, but you saw what the 49ers did in coverage. They were blanketed to him, and they forced Kyler Murray to throw to Michael Wilson. That's why the big game. They're probably regretting that now because they lost the game, the 49ers. So maybe they should let Marvin Harrison get his play and stop letting McBride and Wilson run free in key spots. So maybe as we see McBride be a key factor and someone that they trust all over the field, Wilson emerges as a number 2. This in turn is going to help Harrison, right? At some point where they just can't smother him. This week, it's a good matchup against the Packers. We'll see if Jair Alexander can return. I don't think it's the scariest matchup, even if Alexander's in there, but they got to do a better job of scheming him open. Like, he should not always be facing double teams, moving around, put him inside. You've got to get him schemed open and just not accept the fact that he's not open, right? So that's a little bit on Kyler Murray. He's got to say, okay, I got to throw to this guy a little bit more, even when he's covered. Find a way to get him open. If I'm going to throw like a short screen or something, get Marvin Harrison involved some way a little bit more. And I think that's going to be a to-do list of Drew Petzing this week. Again, you can beat the Packers with the passing game. We saw it with a lot of teams this season. So maybe it's a good opportunity for Harrison to flex a little bit. And I think Wilson can only help for sure. I think just having 2 other options is always going to help the main guy.
And then one last disappointing performance I want to hit on here before we get to the most surprising performances of the week. Deontay Johnson, another one that you hit on this week. 3 receptions, 23 yards on 6 targets against the Bears. Is it Andy Dalton coming back down to life and this Panthers offense coming back down to kind of closer to they were with Breece Young, or is it just the Bears defense?
Yeah, the Bears defense was part of it, but there were a lot of plays that Andy Dalton missed on Deontay Johnson, by the way. This box score could have looked a lot better and made Michelle happy and more with her projection, but there are a lot of plays left on the table, and that could just be Dalton facing a good defense. You had this guy that was an average bridge backup when he's not facing the Raiders. It's a little bit harder, right? So I looked at this and said, okay, this is tough. They also had a random just Jalen Coker appearance as the leading receiver. Yeah. Like, no one had that. We were looking at Xavier Legette and all these other receivers, and then here comes Jalen Coker to lead the team in receiving. Like, come on, man. This was terrible. So we'll see. It is the matchup this week, I think, against the Falcons. So we'll see how that plays out. I don't think it's the greatest matchup. I mean, they're not a good pass rush team, so that could really help get the ball downfield to Johnson. We saw the Bucs have some success, but again, we'll see because they talked about it a little bit. They're going to stick with Dalton for one more week, but there's a chance, folks, that they could toggle back to Bryce Young if Dalton has another clunker against the Falcons.
And we don't want that. We really don't. But I will go back to Deontay next week if I had him. I think the Bears have a really, really good secondary. I'm going back to him next week against the Falcons. I'm okay with that. We're going to get into the most surprising performances of week 5. Tucker Kraft has a second great week. Like, it may have stolen, if you picked him up off waivers, you may have stolen a really good tight end. Tank Bigsby may have stolen the job in the Jaguars backfield, are starting to do so. So we'll get into those to end today's show after a quick break.
This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is also brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. It is America's #1 sportsbook for a reason. Come on, it's almost week 6. If you haven't gotten on the action here for the NFL season, this is time you can start your season with a big return on FanDuel. And it's great because you can track all your games and all the bets that you have. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, you live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. So very convenient there. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's only at FanDuel.com. Again, visit FanDuel.com right now. Get in on the action for Monday night. There's still time with the Chiefs Saints. I do like the Chiefs to cover at home with T Swift in the house. So if you're looking there at that matchup, I believe the line is 5.5. I'm going with the Chiefs at home tonight. You can check out your own bets there. Only at FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, it's time to close the show with the surprising performances. This also leads us into some guys that could be still available on the waiver wire. Tucker Kraft had a lot of ownership this week. We recommended him on the waiver wire. came through big time, makes a long touchdown, scores a second touchdown. The only guy that was really consistent there for Jordan Love against the Rams, disappointing for everyone else, but 88 receiving yards, 2 TDs. This is the second great week for him. I had to trade Tucker Kraft in our league here that we play in because I was desperate for a Trey Sermon. So traded him, but I had Pat Fryermuth, so it was okay. But when we look at it, I think Tucker Kraft may have really separated from Luke Musgrave, and I think maybe he's indoctrinated himself as one of the top 3 targets for Jordan Love in Green Bay.
Yeah, I mean, he looks good. He's on the field a ton, 85% of the snaps in each of the last 2 weeks. Like, that's what you need out of your tight end. We were worried about which tight end it's going to be for the Packers this year. We thought they'd eat into each other, Luke Musgrave or Tucker Kraft. It turns out it really looks like it's going to be Tucker Kraft. He looks like the much better playmaker. And I think you just got to keep rolling with him with how the tight ends are gross this year. Now, Tank Bigsby for the Jaguars gets a career high 101 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns on just 13 carries. He was a running back 1 on the week entering Sunday Night Football. Trying to think if anyone would have beat that. I don't believe so. So yeah, I mean, Travis Etienne was a little bit banged up coming into this. I don't know if that's the problem, but 6 carries, 17 yards for Etienne. Bigsby looked great. I mean, breaking off those long runs, those long plays. Maybe he will be more involved going forward.
I don't know how he can't be more involved. I mean, he looked awesome in the last 2 weeks. He also did a big run the week before. So when you look at this situation, I think just looking at Bigsby, it's a little bit like Rico Dowdle, and that's who we're trying to think of if he had a bigger game. Not quite, but Dowdle's kind of said, hey, he's the better option overall than Ezekiel Elliott. I think the Jaguars are coming to that same realization. Keep in mind, the Bears are a very good pass defense, but who went off among the Panthers? It was Chuba Hubbard. He reeled off a long touchdown run. That's the kind of runner Tank Bigsby is. So he's probably going to be a top 20 play this week. Even we don't worry about Travis Etienne. Etienne actually shows up and plays well in London games for whatever reason, but Bigsby has to be locked in the lineups. He's another start with Kraft this week. Kraft gets the Cardinals, who let George Kittle dent the end zone. So these are 2 must plays right off the top. Continue that going into the next week as surprise plays.
Roschon Johnson, 2 rushing touchdowns. Are you taking anything from that? 10 carries, 25 yards. So he was atrocious on the ground, but he did get the 2 rushing touchdowns. DeAndre Swift got 1 as well. Like, is he a playable guy with those?
No.
Getting
he's
that
just
work?
really, if you're in a standard, old school standard scoring league, he's valuable. But like, you're living or dying on those 6 points, and you got 12 doing that this week. But he's just not getting enough volume. I mean, Swift is still the man. They just like Johnson. He's a little bit bigger back in the red zone. Now, another guy I wanted to talk about is Tyrone Tracy. Now, it was a little bit of luck there, right? That Eric Gray, if he had scored instead of fumbled and the ball went the other way, you might have seen more of Eric Gray. But then Tyrone Tracy, yard after yard, and I look up, he has 130 yards from scrimmage. Like, what the heck? But then I was looking at this guy looked very good. Maybe it's just also the Giants' offensive line, because Devin Singletary's had some good games. The Seahawks, we know, were terrible against the run against the Lions, so it was a matchup. But this week, if Singletary has to sit again, it's the Bengals and that front to attack. You think they're going to keep feeding Tracy? I think so. He looked really good, and we'll see how that plays out with him and Singletary. Singletary could be out for a little while.
Yeah, and now if you have Singletary and you've been playing him, I would be a little bit nervous that when he gets back, I mean, Tracy showed out here, right?
Yeah.
And he looked really great. So if he does that again, also against the Bengals, it's going to be hard. I do think Singletary could lose some of his playing time there, but Tracy's definitely a guy that you're going to want to pick up this week. We'll get into him more on tomorrow's waiver wire show. But if Singletary misses against the Bengals, that's going to be a huge one. Now, also another guy that I was already considering picking up last week. I wrote him in my like late waiver wire piece on PFF to pick up right before, the games on Sunday. But Jordan Whittington, the rookie wide receiver for the Rams, 10 targets, 7 receptions, 89 receiving yards, leads the team in receiving yards. He's on the field all the time with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua out 97% of the time in week 4, 92% of the time in week 5. Unfortunately, they have a bye week, so I guess you don't really want to prioritize him as a waiver wire pickup maybe just yet. And we'll see if Cooper Kupp comes back after the bye, and how soon Puka will come. But Raiders right after the bye, the Vikings, Seahawks, like some interesting matchups there. Whittington is just a rookie. Maybe he's starting to, kind of come out.
Yeah, and it's funny. They've found ways for Tutu Atwell to be productive. Demarcus Robinson scored against the Packers. So they're finding ways to get it's just good coaching. That's what it comes down to, that these receivers you can plug and play. We saw that last year, right? When these guys went down, Nakua emerged. You had Atwell be valuable for a while until Cup returned. So I think Whittington still might have a role a little bit more than Atwell, right? If Cup returns, Atwell's kind of the default kind of slot guy, right? Whittington is more of that Nakua role. So then you might have somebody valuable when there's a return for Nakua, but there's also Tyler Higbee who could return and complicate things a little here for the Rams. But when you look at this right now, Whittington, everyone's been buzzing about him. I mean, he's been the fantasy buzz community guy. He finally produced a game that we would say, yeah, let's get buzzy about it. But yeah, let's see about Cooper Kupp returning. I'm less hot on him after a bye should Kupp return. I think the next guy, too, I'll talk about, Darius Slayton. I think he's another guy that probably is going to lose value if a certain player returns.
Yeah, Darius Slayton has a great game. 8 receptions, 122 yards, and a touchdown. This hurts my heart because Malik Neighbors, I have him everywhere.
Yeah.
He was going to be ranked as my wide receiver 1 this week. And if Darius Slayton could do this against the Seahawks, imagine what Malik Neighbors would have done. It would have been, if not this game, probably even way bigger. But Slayton's a guy, just keep on waivers. Malik Neighbors should be back unless this is like a really terrible concussion. You would expect him to be back this week. Alec Pierce is the last guy I want to hit on here. Would you consider picking him up? He just keeps making these big plays. It was only 3 receptions, but he turned that into 134 yards and a touchdown. If Joe Flacco remains the quarterback now for a week or two with Anthony Richardson, we'll see how long he takes to come back. Flacco's willing to just throw it up. Is he a guy you would consider throwing into your flex for those big plays?
Oh my gosh. I mean, Alec Pierce, I don't want to use this pun, but I will because he's plays for the Colts. He's a one-trick pony, man. He wants to go up and get the ball and make big plays, but do they ever throw him in any other situation? And what was surprising is this was like an Anthony Richardson type deal, right? Joe Flacco, here, throw it up Alec Pierce, catch it with one hand, jump over a guy, make a big play. So he only had 3 catches. I think he also only had 3 targets. He scores once, 2 big plays. Do you really want somebody like that in your lineup every week? I mean, I think it's during the bye weeks, if the matchup is good downfield, like it was against the Jaguars, he's worth maybe a shot. But keep in mind, Josh Downs is a more consistent one. Look, Michael Pittman, his usage is questionable. He did score, which was nice in this game. But, I don't know. I think it's going to be a fickle offense from week to week. And who knows if Richardson returns from the hip pointer this week. Does Jonathan Taylor come back? So, a lot of it's really hard to read into the Colts week in and week out, but at least Trey Sermon did come through, scored, had a nice receiving day there, and really took advantage of that matchup. So again, this shows you always go after that backup because, look, Tyrone Tracy Jr., we didn't think much about what he was going to do with Singletary out. He produced. We had this situation with Sermon. He was the backup. He produced. So that's all you can do in fantasy. And we had that with Zach Charbonnet also early in the season. So make sure, as we're going forward, if you had Bigsby in behind Etienne, you would be fine. Get your handcuffs in there. That's what I'm going to tell you. And use that waiver wire potentially this week and week 6 to do that.
Absolutely. That is it for today's episode. Thank you to you all for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Every day, as Vinnie and I will be back tomorrow to dig into the waiver wire. We'll also discuss anything that maybe crazy happens in the Chiefs Saints game. I'm really hoping that Alvin Kamara has a bad game because I'm against him in fantasy. But I hope you win your matchups tonight and you get everything you want. We will talk to you tomorrow. Bye, y'all.